My main character is Tony Vicar. He lives in an imaginary Vancouver Island town called Tyee Lagoon, and he is a failed musician. He is a wannabe. I've known 500 guys like this who their hairstyle never really got past the 70s, and they're out of style, and they're always on about the newest guitar. Just dreamers, and God bless them.
On this edition of Today in BC, we'll chat with Vince Ditrich. He set the beat not only as a drummer for the legendary rock band Spirit of the West, whom he played with for 30 years, but for Doug and the Slugs, BTO, Long John Baldry, and more. And now he's setting the beat using a keyboard, which can have a pretty nice rhythm of its own, as an author, having just released his first book entitled The Liquor Vicar.
Why spend hours searching dealerships, comparing makes and models? Find the best of BC's inventory in one place, todaysdrive.com. You'll have access to inventory across BC, where you can easily find a vehicle that fits your needs and gets you where you need to go in comfort. Get in the driver's seat. Don't miss out on the many options we have available for you. Powered by Black Press Media, todaysdrive.com connects you with exclusive new and used car deals.
Today in BC is a Black Press Media podcast. I'm Peter McCulley. We're joined today by Vince Ditrich.
Hello, it's nice to be here.
We certainly have a lot to talk about today because I have to tell you, it seems like you packed a lot into your story so far. Tell me a bit about where you grew up, your parents did, what family life was like.
I grew up in southern Alberta. My father was a musician, a lifelong musician, so he basically taught me how to play, and he let me play in his band from age of 6 onward. I was eventually his steady drummer from about age 9. I learned a lot about polkas and waltzes and weddings. I learned a lot about weddings.
Did he play a lot of different instruments, or was he a band leader?
He was a band leader. He played a lot of wind instruments. He taught all instruments. He understood theory very well. He was a great reader. He was not exactly a gifted ad-libber, but he could play orchestral stuff and conduct it very, very well.
This seems like a good story. You had your first paying gig as a drummer at age 6?
Correct. I was along at a wedding where my dad was performing. Somehow I ended up on stage and I played a set. There's a feature set, 4 or 5 songs where I played with the band, and I got ovations and tips, and I thought, oh man, this is good. And I went home. He paid me that night. He gave me $15.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you and I both had interesting diets when we were starting out. We seem to be about the same age, and when we were starting out in our respective careers.
I moved to Vancouver in the mid-'80s, and I was very young, 23. By the end of the second month, I was so broke. I had no gigs. Obviously, you don't waltz into Vancouver and say, howdy, start employing me. It takes a while to get your traction, I ran out of money. It was desperate, so I figured out that I could go down to the local 7-Eleven, which is 2 blocks away, and I could get 3 hot dogs for $1 for a toonie, or rather a loonie. And that, I subsisted on that for, at least 10 days.
Mine was Vienna sausage. Little cans of Vienna sausage.
The cans of, what they call in the States, Vienna sausage. Yeah, I know the ones. Those are really desperate looking.
As a drummer, you get to set the tone for concerts, but also you get to take a step back and watch the performance of the band from behind the band, and that's always a very unique perspective.
Yeah, there's a saying with many musicians that the drummer's the goalie, and he or she certainly holds down the goalie position on the stage, and you're best suited in that chair to feel the crowd's energy and circulate it through the band and back out to the crowd. It's a big circle of energy exchange, and the drummer is generally best suited not only from his position on stage, but intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. Drummers gravitate to that job of just kind of watching for hazards and steering the boat, making sure tempos adjust. Because some modern bands play to a click track, so everything is synchronized with their electronics and their sequencing. But I know Many times we have sped songs up because we wanted more energy that night, or slowed them down because we felt really comfortable in a more elegant surrounding where people were sitting in soft seats and perhaps have had a little vino, and you could just get a little more elegant.
Adrenaline has a lot to do with that too, right?
Certainly, and with Spirit of the West, it was all adrenaline all the time. That was, we were a sweat band, and we knew it. Very fine musicians, very, very fine musicians, but we understood that the people aren't worried about my ratomacues or my flammadiddles or my sticking on this or that. They don't give a damn. They want entertainment. And entertainment comes from energy and hilarity and passion and movement. That's what they want. That's what they got.
Well, they certainly did, and for a long time, too.
Yeah, almost 30 years it was over 30 for the band itself. I came in when they decided they wanted to add a drummer. I became their drummer and invented the role for myself.
Spirit of the West, when they started, didn't have a drummer.
No, it was three-piece at first, just, like a baron, and then the Irish hand drum, and flutes, whistles, bouzouki, banjo, acoustic guitar, vocals. Mm-hmm. So it was very traditional. Every once in a while, Johnny would break out the old Morse bells or the bones, and he'd stagger around making clicking sounds or jingling sounds. And, he was just so charismatic and such a ball of fire that it didn't matter what he did. People just ate it up.
You've been a musician pretty much all your life. You had your first paying gig at age 6, as you say. Who have you looked for to inspiration and direction as far as musicians go? Anyone you'd like to have call you on a Thursday afternoon and say, hey, Vince, we need a drummer tomorrow night. Can you fly out?
Not anymore. I'm retired now. I mean, after 50-some years at the kit, I think I've said everything I need to say, because now being an author requires full engagement. But in the day, I lived for being called at the last minute. I did it many, many times. Anybody who's a jobbing musician gets called at the oddest time. Somebody got sick or somebody didn't show up. Come help. And that is the best, because you walk in and you can be the hero. Mm-hmm. You can make a couple of mistakes, but as long as you get through without them having to have a heart attack every song, you're the hero. And it's super fun, and you always get an extra beer for it.
So Act 2, let's call it. Vince emerges as an author after retiring from the drum kit. So your first novel's been released. It's entitled The Liquor Vicar.
Indeed.
Has writing always interested you?
Yes. In fact, I thought, having been, in a musical family, I just presumed it was kind of how all families went, and apparently it wasn't. And I took it for granted, and I really, really wanted to be either an astronaut or a writer, or maybe a writing astronaut. And that damned Hadfield scooped me.
Well, if you were an astronaut, you'd have the time to write.
Yeah, not much doing, huh?
No, just circling the Earth.
Yeah, I don't know. It fascinated me. I just really held those guys up as heroes, and I used to write to all the NASA installations and write letters to astronauts, and I just have a 50-year-old collection of NASA information pamphlets, photographs, books, like autographed portraits of the big guys.
Interesting.
Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Deke Slayton.
That was the era we grew up in, watching all the Mercury, Gemini, Titan, Apollo missions.
Titan was the launch vehicle. Yep. Gemini was the capsule on top of it.
See, there you haven't forgotten a thing.
Not a bit. I know Neil Armstrong's wife's maiden name.
Okay.
No, Sharon. But, it's that bad. It's, I am not right when it comes to that stuff. I watch Jeopardy and occasionally they'll ask a space question and somebody doesn't get it. I'm just yelling at the TV. You idiots! I know his father's address.
What do you read? Who do you read?
Well, like most men, I love history, as opposed to fiction. Mm-hmm. I don't read as much fiction as I do history. As a kid, I loved Robert Heinlein. Just loved him. Very big fan of Farley Maude. I read any Churchill I can find. I have probably the biggest collection of Churchill books in the news, at least. Bill Bryson, always funny, always brilliant. I'm just trying to think of the most notable ones. I read something and I go, why don't they have more books? Or why doesn't that journalist have a book? There's some brilliant writers out there.
It's a lot like music. It's a lot harder to navigate now than it ever was.
Yeah, I think so. And I also believe that writers are naturally geared towards hiding in a tiny room with a computer and perhaps under a blanket. They're publicity averse. They don't like bragging. They don't like to get out there. They don't even like their pictures published in journals or things like that. So, and they go, well, why didn't my book sell? Well, why didn't our record sell? Because they didn't have a photo of you. They never saw a video. You didn't have any zazz.
When Today in BC continues, Vince Ditrich will tell us about his new book, the first of a trilogy, and his experience as a kidney transplant recipient.
From the latest community news to informative, entertaining reads for travelers and the cannabis curious, just visit your local Black Press Media community newspaper website to sign up today.
We're back with Vince Ditrich. Tell us about the book, the characters, the plot.
My main character is Tony Vicar. He lives in an imaginary Vancouver Island town called Tyee Lagoon, and he is a failed musician. He is a wannabe. I've known 500 guys like this who their hairstyle never really got past the 70s, and they're out of style, and they're always on about the newest guitar, and this guitar is going to be the one that's going to loft them over the top, and they're going to have a big following in their tiny little town, and just dreamers, and God bless them. But having been in music as far as I have gone, I look at that with a different perspective now, and I go, oh man, if you were going to break, it would have had to have happened 35 years ago, and you're still putting on the show at the Moose Lodge. And it's okay if you do that as a hobby, but some of these guys really, truly believe still. I just have a smile for them. I'm not derisive in any way. I just smile and go, yeah, I guess some guys get into race cars, and other people think, they have their hobbies, but these guys take their hobby so seriously. And that's Tony Vicar. He's that guy, and he is beginning to become aware of how badly he's failed and how behind the curve he is in his life, and he's come upon hard times. His musical career has been reduced to the point that he's DJing rural weddings, which to somebody who thinks he's, David Gilmour, that's the worst case scenario. And he's also doing Elvis impersonations in the middle of his DJ act. So he's just feeling really loathsome, very, very down in the dumps. And at his very lowest moment, where the book starts, incidentally, I've started him at the darkest, most awful moment, which I think could serve to put off some readers. They might read that first 2 chapters and go, this guy's too dark for my taste. But it was meant to illustrate how something that innocuous can get that bad. I've seen it. I've lived it. And so I included that. And then he meets his love interest, who is Jacqueline O'Neill, who everybody knows as Jackie O, begins slowly dragging him out of the emotional pit he's in. Eventually, they go out to dinner together. Not a great dinner, because she's a pleasant, happy person, and he's an old fart. They come upon a car accident. A fatal car accident. One of the passengers in the vehicle has died. The other one is just barely hanging on. And Tony Vicar somehow rises to the occasion and appears to have brought back to life the other person. He becomes very famous for bringing this lady back to life. And from there, he becomes famous, but not for the reason that he expected to become famous.
Lotto tickets are involved?
Yeah, because once he's done this one thing, every act afterwards has a pile-on effect. You're apparently a lucky person. You do all sorts of miracles. Bless my lottery ticket. And he goes, sure, it's blessed. Ha, ha, ha. And then the guy wins. So this just adds and adds until he becomes internationally famous.
Well, I read the book. It certainly has a pace. It really moves along very quickly, changes direction just as quickly as the pace. And I understand this is the first of 3.
It is a trilogy. That's the origin story. And it was, incidentally, so fast-paced because I wanted to write it as if it was a TV show, a tightly cut TV show. Because obviously I have plans to turn it into a TV show. So I wanted, especially this first book, to be punchy and quick so people can go, okay, I get it. It's fun. I want to know where he's going in book 2 and then 3. It's world building. It's a funny, rustic, hard-edged world. but it's hopefully fun. And I hope everybody that reads it looks at the characters and says, oh, I know a guy just like that.
So what was the creative process like for you? Did it take a fair amount of time to piece the story together? Do you have little bits of paper in your pocket, a chapter here and a chapter there, or?
You would not believe the amount of wandering around the house from corner to corner in my pajamas, muttering. My poor wife, are you losing it? No, I'm writing.
And how long?
The first book took me a couple of years of pretty solid effort, because you're kind of learning on the job how to write a novel. There are a lot of pitfalls and standard mistakes that neophyte writers make, and you have to reel it back in and start again on the proper path. And I did countless numbers of beta reads with my writer and artistic buddies, and I'd ask, what about that character? What about this turn of events? What do you think? What do you think? And I got a lot of helpful input, and I really kind of focused things down on this quick-paced adventure with, enough levels there to indicate that there would be a lot more life and adventure in subsequent books.
On this podcast, we almost always ask this question: what advice would you give someone pursuing a career path similar to yours? And now we've got two paths, so you can give two pieces of advice, if you like, about writing as an author or as a musician.
I think my personality has me conclude that listening to other people is unwise. I mean, you have to listen to a certain amount of advice from really highly qualified people, but don't think that everybody's highly qualified because they're more experienced than you, because a lot of people have only risen to their level of incompetency. And this is going back 50, 55 years. You look at so-and-so in the tiny town as a child where you're the drummer, you're the 8-year-old drummer, and you ask the 20-year-old drummer, well, what would you do? Well, you don't know at age 8 that this guy has the most limited horizons. So if you put your faith in his judgment, you've hurt yourself. You got to listen. You got to reserve judgment on these things. That's what I did with writing. I did not submit to, so to speak, to doing things the normal way, because I learned from rock and roll, you just walk in the door and you push hard, politely, hopefully charmingly, but incessantly. So instead of going through endless rounds of submissions and waiting for people to not like you, you're asking them for permission to be liked, and people, they pounce on that. That's ridiculous. You just go in and call the boss. Hello, do you have any idea who I think I am? Here is my book. Read it. I commend thee. And they always read it. They always got back to me quickly. And, God bless the book publishing people. They almost always say, not for us, but try so-and-so. And I faithfully did that. And I managed to track down somebody who was willing to take me on, which was Scott Fraser at Dundurn in Toronto.
So I have to ask you about the very profound experience you went through having a kidney transplant.
Probably at my sickest. I was in the hospital for about the 6th or 7th time. I was just down in the dumps. I'd had a couple of potential donors rejected for various reasons. I mean, it's such an exhaustive process to be a donor and be accepted as a donor. And I had another one that just, got turfed. There was some problem with, I don't even remember now. Your memory starts to go when you get that sick. My niece and her husband came in and they said, how you doing? How did things go with that last donor? I said, no. He got pushed out of the sequence because of something that doesn't match. So he said after a pause, well, they accepted me. So what ended up happening is that he had to fly all the way to Halifax and give away his kidney to someone he never met. Nobody knows who it is. It's an anonymous donation. And I, in return, received a kidney from an anonymous donor in Vancouver. So in between us, in between Halifax and Vancouver, there were 7, all told 7, so 5 more donors and recipients, which at that time, in 2016, was the longest chain they've ever been able to keep together to the end.
Unbelievable.
It was unbelievable, and I thought I was going to collapse the whole chain because I got sick shortly before that. For the very final shows of Spirit of the West, I ended up in the hospital. I had to check myself out and drag my dying carcass to the Commodore ballroom because I'd come down with H1N1, if you can believe it. That was the worst thing ever. So I managed to play those last 2 nights. I'm sure I felt the Grim Reaper hanging over my shoulder on a couple of occasions. And I was in such good hands, though, because it was the final show. It was a very big deal in Vancouver. And Chris McFarlane from Great Big Sea, their drummer, he flew out to back me up in case I couldn't play. So there were a couple of times where I literally leapt off the kit and he leapt in and took up right in the middle of a song. And then Pat Stewart, one of my very favorite drummers in the whole world and one of my best friends, who's The Odds and Colin James and Brian Adams, and he's a gorgeous drummer. He was there too, and he was ready to leap in. So I was totally covered off. And it was quite a beautiful way to end that 30-some year career with those great guys.
Well, speaking of concerts, I found a clip of you in concert with Spirit of the West where you sang lead vocals. And I wasn't aware you did that. I know you were tucked away in the back making things happen, but singing a tune that perhaps first-time concert goers to a Spirit of the West concert might not have expected.
Back in the late 80s, I had this little trio. I was in a little trio. We called ourselves the Croon Tunes. It was Stephen Drake and Doug Elliott of The Odds. Very heavy musicians and not right in the head, just like me. We were just three of a perfect pair. We dress in custard yellow polyester tuxedos with big velvet bow ties, and I had nerd glasses with a Band-Aid. We sang the corniest available material. Madness. How much is that doggy in the window? Una Paloma Blanca. Blue Spanish Eyes, and just put so much welly into it. We were an underground sensation in Vancouver. We'd play at the Railway Club, and it would be jam-packed with people. But it was madness. It was just so out there. That was one of the things that made me known in the city of Vancouver amongst the musical community. Oh, you're hiring Vince? Oh, have you ever heard him sing? This is crazy stuff, man. I think we had one night where I said, you know what, I want to try one of my stupid songs. And they went, sure, we'll go back and have a beer in the middle of it. You know, any chance for a break, those lazy blighters. And I went out and I did it, and Hugh McMillan accompanied me on one of his many instruments, and it was a huge hit. It just went over the top, so it became a staple of the show, and I always did it. And when we did our symphonic recording and our symphonic touring, I had a symphonic arrangement of That's Amore done as a vocal feature for me, and I would prance about the stage like the silly git that I am, and the audience would sing and call. I would call and they would answer, and it was just beautiful.
In Napoli, where love is king, where boy meets girl, here's what they see. Shine like you've had too much wine. That's amore. Bells will ring, ting-a-ling-a-ling, ting-a-ling-a-ling, and you'll sing Vita Bella. Hearts will play tippy-tippy-day, tippy-tippy-day, like a gay taratella. Well, the stars make you drool, you like a pasta. That's amore. When you dance down the streets with the clouds at your feet, you're in love. When you walk in a dream, but you know you're not dreaming, signore. Scusa me, but you see, back in old Napoli, that's amore.
What's next for Vince?
Well, I quite literally finished book 2 in its first draft form and submitted it to my publisher. So the decks are finally clear for me to do some laundry and, I don't know, stick my head out of the burrow in the earth I have. I think my future for the next while is promoting book 1 and finishing rewrites on book 2. And then I'll have to leap into book 3, and I have no idea where I'm going with it right now. I know how it has to end, but I don't know how I'm getting there.
Thanks to Vince Ditrich for joining us on this edition of Today in BC. We'd like to hear from you. Send us a voice message with your comments and suggestions to podcast@blackpress.ca, or visit our website, todayinbc.com, or our Facebook page, Today in BC. You'll also find this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, and Google Podcasts.